Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast presented by the Chargers Podcast Network. My name is Steven, and I'm your host as always, and joining me is my guy Tyler. Tyler, what's up? How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. My students were very concerned for me. They would walk into class and go, "Mr. Schoon, are you okay today?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm all right." Then some kids would go, "Hey, did you see the game yesterday? The Chargers lost." And I'd say, Yeah, I did see that game. I was there. I'm doing okay. Thankfully, work keeps us busy, so I'm doing all right. Steven, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's always funny, like my family members and like friends from college and high school and stuff like that. Whenever the Chargers lose a game like that, they'll text me and they're like, "Are you okay? Like, are you doing all right?" I'm like, I just watched my team lose a game. Like, I'm not dying. Like, I'm fine.
I'd rather die, Steven.
Yeah, for sure. It's just funny though, like without fail, like none of them ever text me when the Chargers win. It's only when they lose. "Are you okay? You doing all right?" "Yes, I'm good. I promise I can handle a loss. I'm fine." So obviously, wish we were recording under a more optimistic view of the Chargers, but we'll do our best to paint a more positive outlook today. You guys are obviously going to be watching this on Wednesday after the Chargers lost to the Dolphins. So we're about midway through the week. The team will be, of course, starting their preparation for week 2 against the Tennessee Titans. So we'll have a little bit of back and forth off of our takeaways from the first week, and also kind of looking ahead towards some things that we would like to see changed for week 2, and kind of previewing that game. We will also have a game ball segment at the end of the show. I don't know if we clarified that. We are doing a charitable donation each week that we do this. So teams don't do game balls after losses, but Tyler and I want to, take the time to do that because we believe in kind of spreading the goodwill there. So we will hand out some game balls at the end of the show today. Before we dive in, obviously Tyler and I are fans of the team, just like you guys are. We are fortunate to have this platform and very grateful for it. But the opinions that we express on this show are not always reflective of the Chargers organization. They are ours and ours alone. We just happen to be creating content for the team. So that being said, Tyler, let's dive into this week 1 defeat. The Chargers obviously losing 36-34 at the hands of the Miami Dolphins. We've had a little over 24 hours to sit and simmer about this game. So Tyler, what's kind of your big takeaway from yesterday's performance?
I mean, unfortunately, the big takeaway is the big storyline of the game. And unfortunately, I can't start this. If you're asking me what my big takeaway is, I can't start by talking about the offense. It does have to be the defense. On our live stream after the game, we talked about the offense first, but today I have to talk about defense because it just became a bit more frustrating when you see the numbers come out and you see what the Chargers did last year against the Dolphins compared to what they did this year and how things have changed. And the takeaway from everything that I've seen, and now you're seeing like Baldy breakdowns and Cody Alexander's doing breakdowns, it's just evident that the Chargers were either underprepared or unprepared for the game. Whatever the intention was going into this game, and look, you plan as best you can. The offense of the Dolphins, they prepare too, and they were going to throw things at the Chargers that they were not expecting, that they had not seen before. I get that, but it just looked like throughout the entire game the Chargers were not ready for this game, a game that they had plenty of months to prepare for. Not that that's all you do for an entire offseason, of course, right? You're trying to solve issues you had against Jacksonville, right? But they were unprepared. And it was a surprise to see the more I asked questions, the more I looked around, charts, graphs, stats, whatever. It was such a surprise to see how much the game plan was so different from last time, where the Chargers, the Dolphins couldn't do anything, and the Chargers had fewer guys on defense. So just looking at the numbers, the stunt rate of the Chargers in this game went cut in half from the last game, from 35% to about 17%. The big storyline of this, the one that I think fans are most frustrated with, is that the man coverage snaps went from, they played man 4 times last year to 52 times this year, and, it didn't quite work. Baldy broke down. Khalil Mack is lined up on Tyreek Hill on 1st and 5, and believe it or not, Tyreek Hill converted on that one. And so you continue from there. And again, the more you unpack this, the more frustrating it becomes because you Joey Bosa with penalties, then you have J.C. Jackson with got the interception and then went out at the 4-yard line. Then there was a penalty on the Hail Mary. The stunts weren't really working as much as maybe you'd like. The blitz rate for the Chargers, I don't know about the blitz rate, but the two linebackers, they had 0 pressures on their 8 blitzes, whereas like someone like last year, Drew Tranquil would have 2. So it didn't work. Whatever they were doing, whatever the intention was, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know the answer to this. I don't. But it didn't work. And the tune of it, the more you hear, the more you read Daniel Popper's articles, someone brings up this stat or that stat, I'll try to go through some really quick just to paint a picture. As much as no one wants to hear this, you can skip 30 seconds on the video if you'd like. The Chargers have given up the most yards they've allowed since 2006, the most net passing yards allowed in franchise history, 14 explosive passes, which is the most in the NFL since 2011. As Daniel Popper pointed out, since 2000, teams that have rushed for more than 200 yards and allowed fewer than 100 rushing yards and did not turn the ball over and won the turnover margin by at least 2 were 110-0. They never lost until that game. 2 had the 4th most passing yards in Week 1 in NFL history, and the Chargers are currently dead last in yards, points allowed, and yards per play. And in particular, yards per play, they're worse by 2.4 yards, worse than the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are at 5.9. Chargers at 8.4. So I hate to rehash all of this, but I think we do need to understand it, especially looking at even some comments from fans after our stream, like, oh, it's an overreaction to Week 1. They'll be fine. Defense played okay. I don't know if that was entirely the case, and unfortunately, I just don't think whatever the plan was, it didn't work. And as I said on the live stream, it's the last thing I'll say about this. As I said, and people seem to respond to this, so I'll do it again. I'm a teacher, and so if I have honors kids, and I do, I have 3 honors kids. Hello, if you're watching. If I have them go take a test, a state test, and they all bomb it, that's on me, right? There are so many all-pros in this defense, great players, highly paid players, highly drafted players. It should have been better. So I'm not really breaking new ground here. I think every Chargers fan who watched the game kind of feels the same way. The defense did not show up at all like I would have thought, and certainly not like they would have thought. And it was a disappointment. And I hope that moving forward, I hope this is it. It's the one game, oops. Every year there's a team that upsets another team or something. Oh my gosh, this team's falling off. And then they win the Super Bowl. I hope that's the Chargers. But for right now, Sunday, in terms of the defense, it was nothing but a disappointment.
Yeah, I think whatever your opinions are about Brandon Staley, I think objectively he is a quality game planner. That's something that we talked to Sean Syed last week. He has this ability to, manipulate his game plans to the strengths and weaknesses of opposing teams. That's something that we've seen, last year, whether it was against the Dolphins, whether it was against the 49ers. He is willing to change things. Like, he's not just going to stick in his same shell defense and just sit there and let those teams do whatever they want. Which is kind of a main criticism of the Vic Fangio tree, is that they kind of just stick to what they know, stick to that too high shell defense, and teams can kind of pick their spots and manipulate it at a really high function. Brandon Staley is not at that point of his career. Like, he is able to mix things up. He plays man coverage, he plays single high, he plays cover 3, he plays cover 6, he plays quarters, all the stuff. If you would have told me that he was going to change things from what he did last year against the Dolphins to what he did this year, I would have been like, okay, like, I can picture some things. Maybe you are dropping 8 more often. Maybe you are blitzing at a higher level to try and get to Tua quicker. Maybe you're increasing the stunt level. Stuff like that, I would have understood. Taking other chances, I would have understood. But we've seen Tyreek Hill do this to several teams who want to play man coverage. I mean, that Monday Night Football game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a couple of years ago stands out to me, where Todd Bowles just sat back in man coverage and Tyreek Hill went for 230 or whatever it was. Had the 3 touchdowns. Like, this is what he does against man coverage. And so that's the disappointing part for me, is that they went so far in the opposite direction of what they did against the Dolphins last year that it feels like they were just trying to do too much. They were trying to be too creative, overthinking this process, and trying to, force Tua maybe into different looks, I guess. But when you have these kind of receivers, when you have this kind of quarterback who plays in rhythm, you have to do things to disrupt that rhythm. and decreasing the stunt rate, decreasing the zone coverage rate. That doesn't really feel like the way to do that to me. People were in my mentions today saying like, we've seen Brandon Staley in the past use Joey Bosa against some guards every once in a while. I can't remember a time that we saw that. So it was a frustrating game plan to sit there and watch. And Brandon Staley did say that they made some adjustments late in the second half, and that's where they started to drop 8. But even then, it was still single coverage against Tyreek Hill. And some of that is a credit to Mike McDaniel for isolating those plays, but it just was really frustrating and disheartening to sit there and watch just Tyreek Hill, another bomb, Tyreek Hill, another bomb, Tyreek Hill, another 20 yards. And 16 explosive passes, according to True Media from Daniel Popper. That's a ridiculous amount for somebody who prides themselves on putting a roof on the coverage and putting a roof on opposing passing attacks. It was tough to watch. It was. And like there are some positives to take away from yesterday's game, but I think Brandon Staley departed a little too far from what he truly believes is their core philosophies on defense, and unfortunately it resulted in a career day for Tua and for Tyreek.
Yeah, this lack of stunt rate, the lowering of the stunt rate, cutting it in half and switching to more man, that indicates that you probably feel really confident in your guys to win their individual matchups. And to a certain extent, I get that, especially if you're talking about the defensive line. They probably should have won more of their individual matchups than they did. And I was honestly surprised by the numbers that came out today in terms of the pressures. The win rates weren't great, but I didn't expect 17 pressures from that game. It didn't feel like 17 pressures, that's for sure. It certainly felt like no sacks. So I understand if you feel like you have your guys back. You have Joe, you have Derwin. In theory, JC was going to be healthy and all that sort of stuff. And so you could play more man. But like you said, it was such a departure. It was a surprise. And then the Chargers they had no answer. And I'm sure there was more tried than I could possibly imagine. There's more that's attempted and talked about and schemed and discussed than we'll ever know. We don't operate on that same level that these players, these coaches do. They understand more football. They've forgotten more football than we'll ever remember. But whatever it was, it didn't work. So I hope moving forward, it does work, first off. And at least I'm curious if they would do this a game again. If they had this game again tomorrow, what would they do differently? I'm curious if they would continue with what they did during the game or maybe the second half of the adjustments, or would they find something in the middle? Maybe they realize, okay, the individual matchups that we thought we could win, so play more man, fewer stunts, we got to generate some more things different way, different looks. So I'm curious what they would do, but you'd have to see them in the postseason to do that, and hopefully they can get there.
Yeah, hopefully. And this could end up being a one-off situation for the Chargers defense. The Dolphins did the same thing to the Ravens last year. And granted, that was the Ravens' first year in a new defensive scheme, and I think that was week 2, and the Dolphins were I think trailing by 21 in the third quarter, and just kind of roared back like crazy. So maybe that's a possibility here. But I think that Brandon Staley and this defense needs to get back to what their core philosophies are, which is make things difficult on these opposing quarterbacks and give them different looks as opposed to just lining up and playing man coverage, just lining up and rushing one-on-one. And I would like to see, going forward, you crank that stunt rate back up to what it was last year. Even with all of your guys, it's just going to make things easier for guys like Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack to win more frequently. Crank that zone coverage back up, and especially as JC kind of works his way back into things. Asante's playing a new position. I think you just get back to what make things a little bit simpler, and I think that can really benefit your defense going forward.
Yeah, it's a shame, not a shame, but the next offense that the Chargers face is nothing like the offense that they just faced. So we'll never really know what the adjustments might be from week to week, because it should be a complete departure going into next game, because it's a completely different offense you're facing, and I'm hoping they don't score 36. Tennessee not looking so hot, but we'll talk about them, throughout the week. We'll see, but I hope it's a one-off. I think my reservations really are more so when I push back against fans who say it's just week 1, don't overreact, is that the last time we saw them, it wasn't so hot either on defense. and that was a rough performance as well. So if I could just say, if they close out last year and it was whatever, fine. But going from what happened last year as a fan to what we just saw on Sunday, it was rough. And my last time in the stands was against the Chiefs, and we all stood in the stands. And I guess we're a fan podcast, so I'll give you my fan perspective. We all stood in the stands, and the Chiefs had the ball, and they were driving. I don't think a lot of fans were cheering because there's just not a lack of faith. Okay, I'll say, yeah, sure, a lack of faith that the Chargers defense would get it done. And I hope that they're able to, because it was a bummer leaving that game, having been excited about the offense and what they did, and they lost. And I just think that it was a missed opportunity for the Chargers to build momentum for their season, to build momentum for their fans. Because guess what? The next game is the Raiders game, and we're already outnumbered as is. And I hope that the Raiders lose a few games and the Chargers win a few games, so it's a bit more even. But they had an opportunity to sell themselves as like, this is our year, coming to these games. And it's kind of a bummer that the defense let them down again, which is what I saw the last time I saw them play, which they let them down again. Again, hope it's a one-off, but the defense has to figure this out for the fans, for themselves, and for Justin Herbert in this offense, who scored 34.
Yeah, we'll kind of switch gears with that one. With the offense, we saw a historically good day from the Chargers offense. So diving into some things here, first and foremost, I have not watched the All-22 tape yet. I'm really excited to do that. Mr. Rashawn Slater, welcome back, sir. It was a true pleasure watching you play football again. According to Pro Football Focus, Bradley Chubb, who primarily rushed against Rashawn Slater, did not record a single win, which PFF qualifies as getting pressure under 2.5 seconds. Rashawn Slater pitched a shutout in his first game back from injury. So they did credit him with an allowed pressure, which I feel like is probably off of a stunt or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the way that this offensive line played should be really, really encouraging. And I know it didn't end great. Brandon Staley did say today that on one of the last sacks that there was a missed pass protection from the running back. I don't know if that was Elijah Dotson, Austin Eckler, or Joshua Kelley, but there was a miscommunication on one of the last pressure packages that led to one of those last sacks that ended the game. So outside of a couple plays here and there, I thought the offensive line really set the tone and dominated. Benjamin Solak of The Ringer pointed this out. The Chargers rushing attack had one of the best performances of any rushing attack in like the last 20 years that this has been a thing. So if you look at the rushing success rate, which is, several people keep track of that, the Chargers had a rushing success rate of 66.7%, which was tied for the 7th best mark since rushing success rate started beginning charted. Eric Smith pointed out that they had a EPA per play generated, EPA per rush generated of 0.30, which equates to basically a Patrick Mahomes dropback from 2022 when he won the MVP and won a Super Bowl. So the Chargers rushing attack was incredibly efficient. It was explosive yesterday. Again, haven't watched the All-22, but the numbers for the rushing attack are incredible, and this is something that we saw throughout the preseason when they ran for 600 yards in 3 games, and we were all kind of wondering, like, okay, like, what's this going to look like with starters in this game? What's this going to look like against starting defenses? And the Miami Dolphins defensive front is no joke. They've got a lot of dudes, and their linebacker core is really good too. Vic Fangio's a great coach, and they ran for 230 yards and had one of the most efficient and explosive rushing in days in the NFL over the last 23 years. So Rashawn Slater, hat tip, my friend. Kellen Moore and this rushing attack also deserve a hat tip. So again, rightfully so, I think you focus on the defense to start, but the Chargers rushing attack should really give Chargers fans some confidence about where this offense can go from here.
Yeah, just looking at the EPA per play, like you mentioned, rush EPA 0.322. The next best was, funny enough, Dallas, but with 0.057. Like, there is such a gap on this graph I'm looking at between first and second. That's a huge difference between 1 and 2. And overall, like the passing offense was 9th in EPA per play, but the Chargers were 3rd overall, mostly because of that rushing attack. Hilariously, between the Rams and the Raiders, just like we all predicted, those are the top 4 offenses from week 1, of course. as we all predicted. But no, Rashawn Slater was awesome. I think I might have seen the pressure that he quote unquote allowed. Again, you and I have rewatched games in Charted and felt differently about the number of pressures, either generated or allowed. And it was like one pressure after 3 seconds, I feel like, after a stunt. Like, at some point you lose these. And I think that's maybe what it was. But overall, the rushing attack was phenomenal. And I said it on the stream. It was so good. Chargers fans around me were going, we need to throw it more. Where's the deep passes? It was so good they could run it 40 times and score 34 points. It was so good that fans were frustrated they were running it so much, despite the fact they were scoring 34 points. You look at the gaps from left to right. So from left end to right end, the averages for the running backs were from left to right, 7.8 yards, 8 yards, 6.2 yards, 4 yards, 13.8 yards, 4 yards, 4.5 yards. There was no weak spot. Nothing in there was under 4 yards. It was 4, it was 6, it was 7, it was 13.8. In the preseason, we're dealing with like small sample sizes, right? Like Joshua Kelley's numbers were great, but he had like 12 rushes, and he had the one big run that changes things. We have a bigger sample size to work with now, and it did make a difference. Like the Chargers just kept going. They were so good rushing the football, and you talked about Rashawn Slater. I'll continue with Jamari Sawyer, a player that I wasn't so sure about. Switching to right guard now. How's that going to look? And in the preseason, maybe wasn't the best. I think the standout was more Will Clapp and Zion from those games. And listen, Lindsley, Pipkins, Zion, all were great rushing, were blocking for the run game. But Jamari was the guy I kind of had my eye on the rewatch, and he was awesome. Like he just was able to tap back into that. Oh yeah, I'm a 5-star recruit. I went to Georgia. I was a Bulldog. I shut down Aiden Hutchinson at tackle once. And he was just moving dudes. Like every time that they're running, he's able to flip and move and flip his hips and just create alleys for players. I believe on the big Eckler run, it was him. I believe on Eckler's touchdown, his only touchdown of the game, that was behind him. It was awesome. So the rushing attack was phenomenal. And I think in particular, and maybe you have to fill me in on what the Athletic said, but I love the way that the Chargers utilize their tight ends in the run game. And it's one of those things where you go, oh, yeah, that's why people are paid millions of dollars to call plays in the NFL and to scheme things up in the NFL, because I was so worried about, okay, let's get this tight end. We need an inline tight end. He's got to block, and he's got to block well. He's got to block edge rushers. And Kellen Moore kind of went, we don't really have one, so let's not force them to do that. Let's just let them, we don't have to make them force them to stay one-on-one and block edge rushers. Let's get them a running start. Let's have them pull. Let's have them climb. Let's start them off of motion, whatever. Take on linebackers. Take on DBs. So, Trey McKitty was in the backfield on the Joshua Kelley run, or on Eckler's touchdown, I can't remember. Kelley had a 2nd and 5 that went for 15 yards. Parham was pulling on that one. He was leading the way. The way they moved the pocket on boots, of course, the tight ends are always blocking on the backside. The way they used the tight ends in this game, but in particular the run game, was really, really strong. And it didn't show up necessarily in the stat sheet. It wasn't like, oh, wow, 80 yards, 100 yards, that's great. But the way they blocked was awesome. So, again, there was no bad gap. All the linemen blocked well. The tight ends, I thought, blocked really, really well. And then Eckler and Kelley just ran really, really well. I believe Eckler and Kelley are either 1st and 4th or 2nd and 5th or something like that in rushing yards in the league right now. I don't remember the last time the Chargers had 2 running backs who were in the top 5. Will that hold the whole season? Probably not. But then again, I'm not going to tell Kellen Moore in this group that it's not going to happen. So they're both top 7 in yards per attempt, yards after contact per attempt. Eckler is, I think, 3rd among NFL players in total yards. It's just great, man. Like this rushing attack, we saw the 601 yards in the preseason, but that's the 601 yards in the preseason. Well, here's 200 yards in the regular season in my debut, and it just elevates the floor for what the Chargers can do. And, we said it on the live stream, Herbert will figure it out. Herbert will throw games with 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, you name it, 400 yards on the way. But for now, they have this run game that they can rely on. It was kind of nice to see Herbert have like a fine game, and they scored 34 points. Special teams came through. The line until the last freaking drive came through. They ran well. It was great to see that Herbert, they put up 34 points, and Herbert didn't have to do a whole lot. That was great to see.
Yeah, you mentioned the way that they used the tight ends. It was a lot of isolating them against linebackers, against the corners, against the safeties. It just made a lot of sense based off of what those guys are most comfortable with. It felt like a lot of like Steven Anderson type blocks, which makes sense because that feels like what Gerald Everett and Stone Smart and all these guys are comfortable with. We saw Will Clapp get a rep at fullback. I think Foster Sorrell had a rep as an extra offensive lineman too. So it just everything made sense with the way that they were attacking the Dolphins on the ground. And that's how you have to beat a team that employs the Vic Fangio style defenses, run the football and create explosive plays out of those looks. They didn't pass the ball a lot. Obviously, Justin Herbert only attempted 33 passes. But the way that they were able to run the football was so much fun to see. They needed to do that against this team, I think, to kind of set the tone for the rest of the season. And show everybody, like, hey, like, this is different. This is a different Chargers offense now. Like, we are capable to have these counterpunches and run the football when we need to, because that was such a big issue previously, and it just made life so much harder for Justin Herbert. Now you have this ability to run the ball 40 times and design 40 carries and go out and rush for 230 yards whenever you want to. So it was a great performance by Kellen Moore, great performance by the backs. Austin Eckler currently second in the league in missed tackles forced, according to PFF. We'll see his ankle status is a little bit up in the air right now, but Joshua Kelley had a great day as well. Both of those guys are in the top 18 in yards after contact per attempt, which Joshua Kelley told Arjun on our show a couple years ago that's kind of like the statistic that they focus on for running backs, is that ability to create yards after contact. Eric Smith also pointed this out too. They had 88 yards of their 230 before contact, which speaks to like quality day from the offensive line up front. So again, I understand, like, we're so used to Justin Herbert just airing it out and throwing the ball 50 times, but you have to have these kind of counter punches to maintain an efficient, explosive, effective top 5 offense for the whole season, and that's just not something that we saw this week. So I don't think they're going to run the ball 40 times against the Tennessee Titans, who arguably have the best run defense in the league.
Yeah.
But this week against the Dolphins, this was exactly how you had to draw things up to effectively beat the Miami Dolphins defense, and the Chargers offense was able to do that.
Yeah, they may never need to do this for several weeks, but they have the option to do it. How great would it have been last year in the wild card game for them to just be able to go, all right, let's flip to this part of our game now. We're up by this many points. Let's just run it. And they can't stop us. And that's not a feeling I can recall having with the Chargers in a bit. We saw that in flashes in 2021. Like, they closed out the Raiders game by running, but I don't recall seeing just like the first drive of the game for 96 yards or whatever it was, 94 yards, to only the last drive where they had to pass it, but otherwise they just ran it at will. I don't recall seeing that in some time. We've had head coaches who have wanted to run it and run a lot. That's a Anthony Lynn dream for 40 rushes in a game, but they were never, I don't recall ever being as efficient as this. And the system is in place and the scheme is in place already to where if he won't be this, but if Austin Eckler has to miss time, Kelley, Spiller, Dotson, whoever it ends up being, I feel like those guys can pick it up almost no problem. Because, again, if you're getting 80 yards before contact, you're doing something right on the offensive line with your scheme. So, and shout out Joshua Kelley. I don't know if one of us is going to pick him for the game ball, but it was the first time I watched live, and sometimes you guys are far down on the far side of the field. It's the first time I ever watched the game and went, which running back is that? Is that Eckler or is that Kelley? And sometimes you couldn't tell. The numbers, but again, far side of the field, and I'm kind of blind. He just ran significantly better than I can ever remember. And again, it was difficult to tell sometimes who was who because both were equally amazing.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch for sure. That rushing attack, I think, is, if you're looking for some optimism, I think that rushing attack is what you're hanging your hat on today as a Chargers fan. So we'll pivot gears here a little bit, kind of looking ahead to the Tennessee Titans week. Tyler, what are some things, or what's one thing that maybe outside of what we've already talked about that you would like to see change in week 2?
Yeah, there were a few times, and again, have not watched all 22. I've only watched this sitting in the stand in the 200, so bear with me here as I make these comments. But it felt like many times Herbert did not look as comfortable as I would have liked on some of the deeper drops, some of the boots. He would sometimes just get out of the pocket a bit too early on some of these drops, and I felt like he could have stepped up. The offensive line was great the whole game, so I'm not really sure what that was about. There was that 3rd and 1 where he had a drop back, and he almost got a safety at the 1 yard line. But that's not all on him, right? There are moments where that same 3rd and 1 play, there's not a receiver open fast enough, or you could have just run the football. But if you're going to pass it in that situation, someone needs to be open a little bit quicker than the 3-4 seconds. So Herbert's dropping, trying to just hold on, wait till somebody gets open, and he couldn't, and he almost got a safety because of it. So it just felt like there wasn't enough like of a through line between what they wanted to do on boots, on some of the deeper drops, etc. Whether that's play calling, whether that's Herbert, decision making, you name it, it's not all on Herbert. But I just feel like there were moments where Herbert can do these special things, and it just like it wasn't quite clicking. And do I think it's a problem? No, he'll figure it out. He always figures it out, so I'm not worried. But I'd like to see that get I don't know if fixed is the right word, but just addressed. And then, if I can add another thing, I would love to see Quentin Johnston get the yak opportunities that others did during this game. I think if you draft a player who does, if nothing else is good at yak, use that. All respect to Keenan Allen. God love him. His deep ball, the deep ball that he caught, was outstanding. Go watch that route. Awesome. But let's not give him too many screens after a while. And they can work, and I believe they did a couple of times, but I'd like to see Quentin Johnston get that. That's kind of why you drafted him. So I'd love to see him get involved either in shallow crosser, screens, whatever, get him some yak opportunities.
Yeah, I think a more concerted effort to get Quentin and Mike Williams the football, I think, would be a great thing going forward. Again, not a ton of dropbacks, not a ton of attempts from Justin Herbert. It's a number that I would expect to increase this week, as you're probably not going to want to get into a fist fight against the Tennessee Titans and run the ball 40 times. So airing the ball out a little bit, I think, makes a lot of sense this week, and I think we'll see Kelley do that. That is something that I really enjoyed watching of his over the summer when studying the Cowboys offense, was how he could pivot his game plans to each week and have them be pretty drastically different. So this is a week I expect to be a heavy passing attack kind of offense for Justin Herbert and company. So I do agree. I think Justin was a little bit indecisive at times, and I think that maybe the Dolphins were giving him some different looks. I'm not quite too sure about that until we watch the All-22, but just trust things a little bit more, I think, would be easier for him. And the offense too, I think, had some little clunky moments in short yardage situations, which is to be expected in the first game of the season when the new offense. But when you get into a 3rd and 1 situation, going empty is probably not what I would like to see going forward. But especially with the way that they were running the football, so some things to change there. Defensively, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I would like to see Eric Kendricks get a little bit more involved in a more downhill approach. That is a strength of his, I think. It felt like there was not a lot of designed opportunities for him to rush the passer. I think that is something that I would like to see change going forward.
Yeah, I believe it was 4 for each of the linebackers for Murray and for Kendricks. So I think Drew, again, against the Dolphins, it was 6, I want to say. But we've seen that tend to hover like above 5 and 6, something like that. So, yeah, that'd be great. This whole game, I feel like, is can the linebackers get downhill coming up, because you've got Derrick Henry. And again, all respect to Hopkins and Burks. I love Treylon Burks. But it's about stopping the run in this game, so hopefully they can get downhill and make that work.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Tyler, anything else you want to add about looking ahead to week 2 before we get to some of these game balls?
Not necessarily. I guess maybe statistically, again, have not watched the game on All-22. It's a whole different beast. But I believe the Chargers' 3 starting defensive tackles neither registered a tackle nor a run stop against the run against the Dolphins, and that's not going to cut it against Derrick Henry. And the Titans, where last year, like Sebastian Joseph Day was sensational that game. So more of that. So that's one game. Will that hold across the entire year? Probably not. Obviously they won't get 0 every game, but you got to be better than 0. That's for sure.
Yeah, I do think the Dolphins' run game is very perimeter oriented too. There's a lot of outside zone looks. Brandon Thorpe pointed out they did this concept called a wind back, where they would fake one way and then everybody kind of spins around and goes the opposite direction. They were clearly trying to get to the edges. I don't think that's really going to be the case for Derrick Henry. But this is, again, the style of the fights that the Chargers are going to be in over the first 4 weeks is really funny to me. You get the air it out Dolphins. You get the probably pass the ball 25 times Titans, because they're just going to run the football all the time. You get the air it out Vikings, and then back to the Raiders, who are going to try and run the football a lot. So it's a very interesting contrast over the first few weeks that the Chargers defense is going to get an opportunity to respond. And like we said, hopefully it is a one-off situation, and this becomes just something that we are not super concerned about down the road. Hopefully they figure it out. All right, Tyler, who is your game ball selection of the week? Again, this has a little charitable effect to it. Tyler and I each week are going to make these selections and then give some donation in honor of these players to the Chargers Community Fund. If you feel like joining us, feel free to do that, obviously. Definitely not required, but Tyler and I are going to do it, so we want to have some fun with it. Tyler, who is your choice this week?
I'm stealing Rashawn Slater before you can. I think watching that game, as a coach or as a teacher, sometimes, I don't feel this way, but sometimes people will say that, you're getting paid to babysit. And I think Rashawn Slater is also getting paid to babysit sometimes, because he just handles the edge rusher, you name it, no problem. He just kind of hangs out, and everything's taken care of. Yeah. They don't do anything. He puts them on the ground. They go to sleep. All that sorts of good stuff. Rashawn Slater was sensational in the run game. Amazing. In the pass game, in pass protection, amazing. It's a different tier. He just operates at a different tier than even the lineman on his own line, who performed very well. He's just different. I love watching the anchor, the grip strength, you name it. He can do it all. He did it all. Game ball to him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's such a pleasure to watch him play football again. Really excited to see what he's able to string together this year. I think he really could have pushed for that first team All-Pro nomination. Hopefully, the Chargers can help him out a little bit, because the 49ers sure look good and Trent Williams sure looks good, but we'll cross that bridge when
what
we
else is new?
For me, I think the choice has to be Joshua Kelley. Austin Eckler had a really good game. I think you could bucket this as Kellen Moore in the run game if you really wanted to. But this was Joshua Kelley's best game of his career, and I think this is really kind of, establishing why he's the choice for the RB2 position behind Austin Eckler. I love the way that the two complement each other. We got to interview him at training camp, and he was so excited about this rushing attack and how well it fit his skill set. And to see him come out like this and just really establish himself in a way that we haven't really seen before, I think deserves an extra shout out. For him to get almost 100 yards for the first time in his career, for him to really step up for Austin Eckler in the fourth quarter with his ankle injury going, it just speaks volumes to how far he has come and how well he fits into this kind of scheme for Kellen Moore. So I think we could see a pretty big year for Joshua Kelley, especially if Austin Eckler is going to miss some time. So just really, really happy for the player, somebody who's kind of taken some lumps over his first couple seasons, but finally is in a scheme that can really take advantage of his skill set, running behind a great offensive line. I'm really excited to see what Joshua Kelley can do this season, so he's going to be my choice of the week for the game ball.
Yeah, he told us at training camp, man, I'm glad the running game is looking good because I'm a running back, and so that kind of benefits me for the running scheme to be better. Yeah, and you hear so much about, this scheme fits me so well, and new coordinator, yeah, it's great, it's all good, but it really seems to fit him and suit him. If nothing else, whether it's the plays that are called or not, it just seems to help him with his vision, with his decisiveness, with his cuts, everything that he does. It just, the intention, the half a second faster decisions that he makes, everything looks so much better. There are so many times where he will, not so many times, He'll bounce outside or need to make a move. And occasionally in the past, that's like a fumble or a loss or, shoot, only 1 yard. And this time it was, nope, I'm going to go get 15 more yards. I'm going to go get 7 more yards that way. It was a different kind of performance from Joshua Kelley. And if that's what we can expect, every game out of him, and especially if he's the number 1 now, which thank goodness something finally good happened for my fantasy team, then the Chargers will be dangerous. The Chargers will be dangerous because one great running back, and listen, Austin Eckler probably could have been the game ball too with 164 total yards.
100%, he could have.
One great running back is great. 2 of them is pretty good too.
Yeah, Austin Eckler definitely could have gotten some consideration here too. This is kind of just what Austin Eckler does, though. So I think some of that is kind of expectation.
Yeah, 164 yards. He did it again.
He's a great player, man. He is what it is at this point. I think that was the right way to handle this kind of show. Again, I totally understand the frustrations, and I'm right there with you guys about the defense. Hopefully they can turn it around, but I think this offense is truly going to be a special unit this year that's going to keep them in every single game at this point with their ability to run the football, and we'll see about the passing attack. I think it's going to really express itself this week. People should be really excited about the offense, and I think that's going to be a fun unit to watch this year. Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out?
One last player, Cameron Dicker. You were great, man. I knew if they got to that spot for you to kick that field goal, you would have won it for us. You're great. Thank you for being a good kicker, and I'm still here. I'm still alive.
Yeah, plenty. You're still alive. You're still alive. That's a good bar. Plenty of distance on that 50-yard field goal too, I might add.
Yeah,
looked really comfortable back there. I'm excited to watch what he's able to do this year. So that's going to do it for us tonight. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Of course, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be going live on our channel later this week to really deep dive into the Tennessee Titans and preview this game. We'll have plenty of content on that side of things as well. Appreciate the Chargers for allowing us to have this platform. Appreciate Greg Kim for producing. Appreciate Tyler for joining me as always. And we'll see you next time. Bolt up.